We can't go back to normal. This pandemic has only made environmental crises, systemic racism, and economic inequality even more glaring. And these intersecting crises disproportionately affect low-income, Black, Indigenous, and people of color all over the world. Unfortunately, even though change is inevitable, justice is not. But we know what a just transition can look like. We need to make sure that everyone has access to clean streets, air, and water. We need cultural and systemic shifts towards sustainability and respect for the Earth's resources. We need to disrupt and rethink our extractive supply chains and systems of production, consumption, and disposal. And we need to hold decision makers and polluters accountable for the environmental destruction and inequality that these systems create. Zero waste is more than just an environmental solution. Zero waste is also a holistic tool of social intervention towards well-being for all. The Zero Waste Masterplan draws upon the collective expertise of the diverse organizations in the GAIA Global Network and roots zero waste in economic and social and environmental justice. It aims to equip activists and organizers with an advocacy tool to present to local decision makers and allows them to understand what we mean by zero waste and how to make a zero waste plan and what common sense implementation options are available to them.
I think that right now we have a city that's addicted to burning and burying. That's all they've known for the last 30 years. Pick up waste, give it to the incinerator, let them deal with it. We are challenging that and thinking about what to do with waste other than just burning it. The Zero Waste Master Plan has talked about a lot of these challenges with organizing, with getting involvement and buy-in from the city. And I want to say that it is a great plan for like communities that are trying to get started with moving towards zero waste, and even communities that's in between right now.
Environmental damage and climate change don't know borders. The actions that one city takes affects everyone. And I hope that people recognize the intersections between zero waste and other issues and are able to come together to advocate for zero waste in their cities using the master plan.
I wish we had a master plan when we first started. This will inspire many of other communities to step up and do what they know. They are on the right side. They are on the right side to shut down these incinerators and protect their communities. And I think the master plan will give them that support that they need.
Check out our website to download the Zero Waste Master Plan and join a global community of activists, organizers, and sustainability professionals working towards a resilient zero waste future.
Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you. My name is Denise Patel. I'm the US-Canada Regional Coordinator at the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. We are super excited to be launching our Zero Waste Master Plan with all of you. For those of you who are not familiar with GAIA, we are a global network of more than 800 grassroots groups, NGOs, and individuals across the globe. We envision a just zero waste world built on respect for ecological limits and community rights, where people are free from the burden of toxic pollution and resources are sustainably conserved, not burned or dumped. We work to catalyze a global shift towards environmental justice by strengthening grassroots social movements that advance solutions to waste and pollution. To begin with, I'm just going to go over a few of our logistical notes for today. This session is going to last 1 hour. If you are having any kind of technical trouble, you can connect with technical support through the chat box. We will not have audience Q&A today for this event, but we do invite you to join either the community gathering on October 15th or the city salon on October 22nd for deeper discussion. And we will share details at the end of this event and in follow-up for anyone who registered. So you can find further details through that email and then again on our website. I would like to begin with introducing our speakers. First up, we have Jacqui Patterson. Jacqui is the director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. Since 2007, Jacqui has been serving as a coordinator and co-founder of Women of Color United. Jacqui has worked as a researcher, program manager, coordinator, advocate, and activist working on women's rights, violence against women, HIV and AIDS, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental and climate justice. We're super excited to have Jacqui with us. We're also going to be joined by Shashawnda Campbell, who is the organizer at the South Baltimore Community Land Trust and lives in the Forest Park neighborhood in Baltimore City. Previously, she co-founded Free Your Voice, a student-led group that ran a successful campaign to stop what would have been the nation's largest incinerator from being built, less than a mile away from her high school in the Curtis Bay neighborhood. Through her work at the Land Trust, Shashawnda is working with Baltimore residents to shut down the Brusco incinerator, develop citywide recycling and composting programs with free bins, and create infrastructure to manage waste through Baltimore's Fair Development Plan. I'm also pleased to introduce Councilmember Scott Benson from the city of Detroit. He serves as the Detroit City Councilperson for District 3. He's a frequent bike rider and sustainability advocate and has been a tireless and innovative elected leader in his community since January of 2014. He leads the Detroit City Green Task Force, works to create green jobs, improve environmental policy, and build a more sustainable city, including zero waste infrastructure and systems. Members of the Green Task Force represent residents, environmental advocacy groups, businesses, and local government. And currently, he's working on policy to ensure that the closed Detroit waste-to-energy plant cannot be reestablished. And finally, from the GAIA team, I'm pleased to introduce Aditi Varshnay. She's our zero waste coordinator here at GAIA. She's originally from India, grew up in China, and is now based in New York City. Her academic background centers environmental justice, and she's pursuing a Master of Urban Planning at New York University. Aditi is a community organizer prior to joining GAIA and is fiercely dedicated to building a world that values people and planet before profit. And she continues to organize in her spare time and is one of the lead authors of the master plan. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Adi, and I would like to welcome all of our speakers as well as everyone in attendance today.
Great. Hello, everyone. I am so excited that you are all joining us today. I am so thrilled that this master plan is finally out in the world. Dune, my colleague, is going to be flipping through the plan as you guys hear me talk over the next couple of minutes. You'll get a feel of how you can view it online. You can also download it as a PDF and search for specific terms. So there's a bunch of ways to view it, as well as a more interactive version on zerowastebronx.org itself. So what is the master plan? It is a one-stop shop for activists, policymakers, and sustainability professionals that provides tools and strategies that y'all can employ to lead your cities into a just and resilient zero waste future. And to develop this, we have drawn upon the collective wisdom of the expansive GAIA global network and really paid careful attention to the needs and experiences of workers and environmental justice communities. So reading through it, you will find best practices, case studies, tricks that not only get your city to zero waste, but are truly grounded in social and environmental justice with the ultimate goal of moving from an extractive economy to a regenerative one, because a regenerative economy requires zero waste to really get there. So, through the master plan, we will learn about how EcoCycle in Boulder, Colorado is operating a center that collects hard to recycle materials, which not only increases waste diversion and supports local economic development, but also employs workers who may otherwise have trouble finding employment, like people with autism and those who have been incarcerated for felonies. With the help of Alexandrovich, who works for Nothing Left to Waste and formerly worked for Eureka Recycling, a mission-based recycler in Minneapolis. We'll learn how to write recycling and waste contracts that facilitate transparency and waste reduction and better waste diversion and justice for workers. We researched just transition policy proposals and spoke to the Teamsters Union to explore the measures that cities can take to ensure the well-being and long-term employment or retirement of workers who are transitioning out of polluting waste industries. And we also highlight policies and practices to really center access and equity, because those are two things that are key to zero waste implementation, whether that means providing additional technical support to help small businesses comply or become early adopters of new programs, whether it's working with local community groups to do multilingual outreach or outreach to the disability community during the implementation or planning of a new program, or ensuring that something like safe and accessible public water access for drinking fountains is available to folks to accompany policies to phase out something like single-use plastic bottles. So all of these considerations are things that we write into the master plan when talking about policies to reduce and divert waste, because this is the approach that we take. This is zero waste that is firmly grounded in social justice. And everything I said isn't even including the incredible case studies that feature the work of Shashawnda Campbell with South Baltimore Community Land Trust and Councilmember Benson, which I am sure you will hear much more about soon. But I really hope that you guys check out the master plan. I think Claire has dropped the link in the chat on zerowasteworld.org/ZWMP for Zero Waste Master Plan. And the full version of that video that was playing as you guys started entering is also available on the site. All right, so we will move into our question section. I would love to know why is moving to zero waste systems important to you? And we will start with, Jacqui's here. Jacqui from NAACP is here. So Jacqui, will start with you and then go to Councilmember Benson and then move on to Shashawnda, if that's okay. And you will each have 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you, appreciate it. So first off, just really kudos to GAIA for for doing this work, not only around the Zero Waste Master Plan, but all of the work that you've done over the years. You've been such an asset to this work and to this movement. And I'm always, whenever there's a conversation that comes up about waste and I talk about promising practices and leadership, it's always GAIA. That's the first name that rolls off of my lips. So thank you so much for your leadership. So for us as the NAACP, we certainly see zero waste as a civil rights issue, and we've named it as a civil rights issue from the time that we first started to do this work around environmental climate justice 10 years ago. And certainly the many experiences of our communities speak to the disproportionate impact of how we manage waste now. And it speaks to the imperative to make the very type of transition, just an equitable transition that the Zero Waste Master Plan lays out for us. So for us, we've been working with communities from one of the earliest situations that came to us was the Jackson, Tennessee situation where landfill waste got into the water supply of the adjoining properties of a community, and they ended up with trichloroethylene in their water supply, which is a known carcinogen. And so people ended up with birth defects, they ended up with rare forms of cancer, and every last person in the households that were nearby. But the most egregious part of this injustice was that it went on for several years, and that white families were told about the contamination and told that they needed to drink seek other sources of water, and that the Black families were not told. Even the animal shelter that was next to the landfill was put on an alternate form of water, yet the Black families weren't told. And so they were the ones who ended up with being a cancer cluster and a cluster of birth defects. And so they actually were successful in litigation because the fault was very clear. They had, the county had records of the letters that had gone out, and they had the records of who they went out to and who they did not go out to, which was the Black families. And so it was a classic case of environmental racism. And Sheila Holt Orsted was one of the folks who really led the charge to see justice for that community. And unfortunately, they aren't alone. We know just Valdosta, Florida was another place where they were fighting against an incinerator that was proposed to be in their community. Fortunately, because of the strong leadership of the Valdosta NAACP at that time, Lee Touchton, and she actually connected with folks in GAIA, and they were able to really fight it off, because that incinerator was again posed to be sited like so many of these facilities in a lower income African American community. We also know in terms of another landfill situation that unfortunately we know that landfills are disproportionately sited in communities of color and low income communities. There's a famous kind of image of where the waste went from the BP oil drilling disaster, and including the soaked berms and so forth that they used that were soaked with Corexit, which again, because of our our lack of stringency in our environmental protections, Corexit is banned in 90 countries around the world, but we don't have any restrictions around use of Corexit at all. So waste that was soaked with Corexit went into landfills that were just cited for household waste, just banana peels and so forth. And so that went right, of course, disproportionately into communities of color in the South and the Gulf region. And so the examples are really just too many to name in terms of all the ways that we see these disproportionate impacts in terms of exposure to waste and also to impacts. And I'll just end with another example from Sand Branch, Texas, a community that we're working in now, where it's not a landfill, it's not an incinerator officially, but what it is a community that for the last 30 years, they have not had running water. So they have relied on bottled water for the last 30 years for all of their household needs. But because it's an unincorporated land, it was a former freedmen settlement. They don't have the regular kind of resources or services that people usually have. So the community ended up ends up having to actually do all of their waste management, which comes in the form of burning. So they burn those bottles. They use like 600 bottles a week, you know, across the community, and they burn those bottles and all the other waste in their backyard. So all those toxins are going right into their lungs because it's just multiple little incinerators in their backyards. So I'll wrap up by saying that that these are all the negative sides, and what's the other reason that we consider to be the Zero Waste Initiative to be a civil rights issue is on the positive side, the opportunities there. We know that there's more jobs from recycling, recovering, reusing, recycling, and we know that there's more jobs from not even producing as much waste in the first place. Much waste in the first place, and we know that there is more economic prosperity in having localism. And we also know that through having localism, we don't have to have trucks going through our communities to taking things through incinerators or landfills, so we reduce the near roadway air pollution. So we see all the different interconnected ways that zero waste is the way to go. So thank you so much for putting together this master plan. We look forward to being a part of its implementation. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Benson, you are up next.
All right, thank you. I just, number one, want to say thank you for this invitation and the ability to represent Detroit here today. And I just want to thank you all for hosting this and making sure that we have a national platform to talk about zero waste and why it's so important for our communities and how it has a negative impact on our communities, especially our communities of color, but how we can look forward and move into the future and help reduce and eliminate that by moving our municipalities and our communities towards zero waste. So why is moving zero waste important to me and then just to everybody? So as a elected official and as a city council person, I'm responsible for the city purse. So number one, moving towards zero waste would save the city of Detroit maybe 2 or 3% of its total budget. That would be a huge savings of money and to our individuals. And people in Detroit are responsible for paying for their solid waste removal. And so we're able to save people money every year by going towards zero waste or reducing what we produce and are required to send to landfills and until recently burn in the local incinerator. That would be a huge win for our residents. So that's number one. Number two is our environment. And just as Jacqueline said, improving our local environment and making our cities more resilient would be huge. So, and something that's I'm very passionate about is the creation of jobs. And so now you have, in Detroit, we don't do composting at a scale yet. Recycling, we're just really getting into recycling, and we've just only been doing curbside recycling for the last 6 years now, citywide. The ability to move towards zero waste and create those jobs would also help to employ the residents in the city of Detroit. And as many of you know, and famously, we are the largest, blackest, poorest city in the country. So if we're able to move, we have 33% of our residents now live at or below poverty. If we're able to create jobs and get more of our residents employed, we can help reduce poverty. We can help expand people's horizons. We can help their quality of life, improve their quality of life through a better environment, better systems, and just improve the city as a whole, but specifically improve the most vulnerable amongst us, our residents who are at or below poverty. Reducing emissions, getting the trucks out of the city, which we're hauling all of our solid waste now to the exurbs for dumping. If we could implement composting systems, change policies to do that, these are some of the things that we can do to help improve our quality of life, help bring Detroit into a zero waste system. And so these are just some of the things that are huge for us, and it's the right thing to do. And as we move, we also know that the next global crisis is going to be one of climate. And we need to be out in front, leading the way versus chasing the negative ramifications of that crisis. Let's get out in front. Let's make a solution versus just perpetuating the problem. And let's be there. And I want Detroit to be the tip of the spear and be one of those ones leading the way. And so I've had an opportunity, and I see the SF Environment is here, to go visit Deborah in SF Environment. I've seen their Blue Ribbon Award, for being the greenest city, the most sustainable city in the country, I want to make sure that Detroit gets that same award within the next 5 years. So that's one of the things that we're looking at doing. And this, thank you, everybody. I'm really looking forward to the rest of this panel discussion today.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Benson. And yeah, I think that's one of the coolest parts about this. San Francisco is killing it as far as achieving zero waste goals and setting a high standard for cities here in the United States, but it's not just San Francisco that is getting on the road to zero waste here. Like many cities, including cities like Detroit, like Baltimore, are on the road to zero waste. And it's really exciting to see that happening in places outside of, California. So I am so glad that you're here today. And now, Shashawnda, it is on you. Why is zero waste important to you? Why is zero waste systems important to you?
Thank you, Adit. I first want to add to the praise to GAIA to say, again, thank you all for all the work that you do. Thank you for supporting groups like ours on this national level. Thank you, and also thank you for inviting us today to speak on this panel. I want to start with, let's just all close our eyes. I'm going to take you on the journey through our community and how I got started. And so think about a community that's full of people that live there most of their lives. Think about kids playing outside. Think about this community life being put in jeopardy every day because it has an open air coal pile that's right across from the rec center, across from the playground where the children play. Think about there being a landfill not too far away from those. And then there also being a medical waste incinerator. And then there also being Wheelabrator, AKA Bresco. There's trash burning incinerator. Think about all those things in one community. All of these concentrated. Think about the air they breathe. It's not safe. It's toxic. And think about the proposal to build the nation's largest incinerator less than a mile away from the school where these children go. Think about if Free Your Voice wasn't started. Think about if people didn't stand up, then we would be having another conversation. And so that's why zero waste is important. It is important to communities like ours, like mine. This community could have been anyone's community, and it is other people's community that are Black and brown people, that is community of low income. And they get these infrastructures, these polluting infrastructures put in their community all the time. And it is a racist and equitable system that say that they don't matter, that says that their lives is not of value. And those are the systems that cannot continue, that should have never been put in place, but they are. And these systems are protected by being embraced as renewable energy, being paid to kill these communities. And that is not okay. And that is why we need to move towards zero waste, a transition that should have happened a long time ago. The incinerator here in Baltimore has been here for over 30 years. It has cost $55 million a year in health damages to residents. And that's in asthma, that's in upper respiratory illnesses. That was with students that was in the same grade as me, watching them having hard times breathing. While going to a classroom now and asking who has asthma in a classroom and 90% of the hands go up. That is not normal. That is not okay. And those people matter. We matter. And then having a network like GAIA that shows that this pattern is happening all across the world, and that this movement is big, that this movement is taking place many other places to move towards zero waste. This is a big movement, and we all have to stick together to get through it. And so zero waste is important to community residents because it combats the system that we have right now. It calls the system out as what it is, and it says no more. It gives jobs to this community that is carrying this heavy weight to burning all of this waste in their communities. And they don't even have jobs in this community. The jobs are not even local. And so this is why we need to put systems in place like creating infrastructure to address waste in a different way. in a zero waste way, so that these jobs could be giving back to residents that have been suffering for many years, and that don't even have jobs. And these are communities that they put this in that they think cannot fight back, that they have deemed they have other problems. These are people that's dealing with where they're going to get their next meal from, where they're going to pay, like how they're going to pay their rent, choosing those. And they think that they're not going to fight back. But communities are fighting back, and we have done that. And it shows that when we come together, we are the movement, and we hold the power. And I think that that's people power is stronger than any amount of power, any amount of money that they say that we are less than. And so I think that that's why zero waste is important to communities, because it says that we matter.
Thank you all for talking about that. We're going to switch back for me to be able to ask each of you a question. So Jacqui, you talked about the work of NAACP a bit and the long history of all that you all have done on racial, economic, and social justice issues, and gave some really, really great examples, or really terrible examples, of places where we see waste dumping. What are some of the intersections that you see in today's work between waste and what you all are doing? And could you speak to how you're feeling about it, particularly, I think, in this political moment?
Thank you. Yeah, so one big kind of overarching frame for our work is really increasing localism and self-determination at the community level. And we see that as a critical pathway to economic justice. We see that as a critical pathway to racial justice and to climate justice, which encompasses all. And we also see it as critical to self-determination, so that we can really move from a place, particularly as it relates to racial justice, where things are constantly happening to our communities, where we're actually in the driving seat in terms of what's happening. And so whether it's our local food systems, our local energy systems, our local waste systems, we feel that localizing, as opposed to what we have now, which often externalizes pollution. So we have a place like Alabama, which gets waste shipped to it or trucked to it from 26 states, or because of the lower kind of per square foot in terms of landfill usage. And so we really want to shift our entire economy to be one where we are, again, in the driver's seat, and where there is a lot more concentration around local ownership and control, local production, and so forth. And so for us, it's part of that broader vision. It's one key, inextricable component of that broader vision. And in the context of what's happening here, whether it's the racial awakening or COVID-19, it really does show that. I mean, I did a panel recently where Mayor Steve Benjamin from Columbia, South Carolina, said that COVID-19 was like an X-ray exposing the broken bones of American society. And I thought that was just so well put. And the fact that we do have so much in the way of economic insecurity, food insecurity, and so forth, and the fact that it was relatively easy, that by one small tiny virus, that it can just wreck our entire economy and leave so many people in harm's way, shows that we need to rethink how we're doing the entire system. And I think localism and greater self-determination, ownership, and control is key to that. And I think, with, again, zero waste being a key component.
Thank you, Jacqui. That's actually a great segue. So Shashawnda and I have talked quite a bit in the past few months about how COVID's been impacting people in Baltimore. I know they were doing a lot of work as a community group on the ground to support residents through this pandemic. But the South Baltimore Community Land Trust is also doing a lot of really great work around land use. And you talked about self-determination and localization. So Shashawnda, can you talk about how the work that you all are doing around land use and development connects with zero waste?
Yes. And so when we were in Free Your Voice, when we heard about this, this Nation Lodge, largest incinerator being built less than a mile away from our high school, one of the things that we thought about is, how could they do this? Why would they do this? Who gave them permission? They didn't even ask. They didn't come to us. And then that all came back down to like, it's who owns that space? Who owns that land? And so as a community who they basically said their lives don't matter, we wanted to say we do matter. And so we started to look at land and owning land and developing, doing development without displacement. We deserve good things and great things in our communities also. And we wanted to be the drivers of that development where we are not displaced. And in the system that we have right now, it cannot be trusted to do that. And that's why it's important that residents themselves, knowing the passion and being resilient in the communities that have been polluted for a long time. They are resilient communities. They have stood up. They have been fighting. This is zero waste is like fighting for that. It is a long fight. And it can feel isolated sometimes. And it's not. It's just talking with other people and recognizing that we have to support each other in any capacity that we can, and that it might take time, but we will win because we know our stories. We know what's happening in our communities, and we know that we deserve better, and we know that we won't stop until we get that better. And that is why it is important that we are the self-drivers. We are the ones that determine what is built in our community because we know our community better than anyone. And that is why we're looking at land. We're looking at other issues that's related to like being a dumping ground community. We have the second highest eviction rate under Detroit. And so that is terrible. We've been in communities where there is people move from this block to the end of that block. Their stuff is being displaced and just no care in the world for them. And so all of these issues are related. And that is why we are relating them through this land trust that it's not about just having a house. It's about having quality air to breathe. That is a human right, and we will fight for that until the day we are not here no more, until we get it.
Thank you, Shashawnda. I always find all of the work that you all do so inspiring. I want to move to ask Councilmember Benson a question. So you mentioned that the incinerator shut down last year. After a lot of pushing from community members and others, but we were talking about yesterday about how that didn't really solve the problem of what to do with waste in Detroit. So how has that incinerator shutdown shifted or enabled you to take on system shifts to zero waste? And what are some of the things you've been doing in Detroit?
Denise, lots of parts in that question. I'm going to tackle them all. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this. So yes, after decades of community activism, law changes, fights, protests, the Detroit waste energy plant, the Detroit incinerator, finally went dark when it comes to burning gas, although it's not when it comes to burning solid waste. It now burns natural gas to heat and generate steam to power a number of the buildings in the city of Detroit. But removing the solid waste from that plant took away so much of the air pollution in that neighborhood and allowed many of those residents who live locally there to actually breathe again and breathe air that wasn't being polluted by trash being burned on a daily basis. So number one, how has that impacted our solid waste stream and helped us to look for different opportunities to move Detroit towards zero waste? So number one, if you look at the goal of getting to zero waste as 500 steps, I always talk about incremental wins, incremental stair steps towards your goal. Out of the 500 steps, the removal of solid waste from the Detroit incinerator was 200 of those steps. but we still have 300 to go, and we continue to take those. So number one, now that we're shifting our waste stream to the suburbs, how do we not make our problem somebody else's problem? How, now that we're putting way more trucks on the road, more emissions to ship our trash out of the city somewhere else. Now, because we don't have the guaranteed location to burn the trash, we now have individual sorting areas within the city. So now you're bringing solid waste into our neighborhoods, which weren't there before. It's now another problem. So number one, how do we reduce our waste stream to get to the zero waste? So recycling. City of Detroit has established its first curbside recycling. We established this back in 2014, and we continue to look to increase our participation. When I started my job in 2014, we had about a 3% participation rate in the city of Detroit. And as the leader of the Detroit Green Task Force, and I'll get there later, we set a goal of 25%. We hit that goal citywide for 25% participation 2 years ago. Our next goal is to get to 40% citywide, and now I think we're at about 34, although don't quote me, I'll have to go back to my Green Task Force subcommittee. And I want to give a shout out to Natalie Young, as well as Renee Wallace, who are participating today from the city of Detroit, and who are two leaders when it comes to sustainability, zero waste, and composting in the city of Detroit. Thank you all for being here. So getting more of our trash into a different waste stream. So recycling. So now we're doing the curbside recycling. We need to get more and more people participating in that. 35%, 34% is a great number, but let's get to 40%, and let's eventually try to get to 100%, everyone participating in recycling. We don't have a policy on composting yet in the city of Detroit. And now we talk about laws, and I'm responsible for writing laws in the city. We also have to have a business model for it as well, because someone's got to pay for it. So right now, our solid waste contract does not allow for composting. How do we get there? We can do leaves and sticks, but we can't do food waste. We need to be able to take our food waste out of our solid waste stream. And as everybody I'm sure knows here, how impactful in a negative way food waste has on our landfills. That's what helps generate the methane, which is so powerful and such a negative impact on our environment in general. So looking to how we can now implement new policies, and now that we don't have the incinerator to fall back on, we have to be more proactive and get to the next level. So our next stair steps are going to be implementing composting. And right now in the city of Detroit, we still don't have recycling for our commercial properties. So buildings, residential properties of 5 or more units, they don't have recycling. Office spaces, retail, they don't have a recycling method yet. And so right now my office is working with the Department of Public Works, and we're in negotiations on an ordinance that would now mandate recycling for commercial properties, retail properties, offices, as well as residential properties of 5 or more units. So we're looking at how we can now take the next step, and people have been asking for it. And some people don't want it because it's for some people it's a headache, but it's something that we have to do. We need to take the next step when it comes to zero waste in the city of Detroit. Renee Wallace, who is here, has been spearheading our composting policies. And so we're looking at how we can do that. How can we get to a point where our solid waste contract and our ordinances in the city mandate that you also have your black bin, which is your landfill, you have your blue bin, which is your recycling, and then you will have your either green bin or orange bin, whatever color you want to have, which can be your food waste. And so then we'll start our composting. So we have to get there as well. There's also a cost. How do we fund that? That will come from the residents. And so we have to decide, but we also have to educate people. So right now you still see residents in the city of Detroit who will use their blue recycling bins for a trash bin, or they'll contaminate their bin of recyclables with something that shouldn't be there, like a greasy pizza box, or your takeout plastic container that wasn't properly cleaned. And so now you contaminated the entire batch. So we need to do more on the way of education. We need to show people why recycling is not just something for your white soccer moms in the suburbs. It's something for everybody. Now I'll go back to SF Environment. They've done a great job when it comes to messaging of why recycling and sustainability is so important for everybody, not just what people do in the suburbs who have that disposable income, and how it can impact us. And if you think about it, poor people, people without great means or disposable income, have been recycling, i.e. reusing and reducing for generations. So when you have your jelly jar that becomes your drinking glass, when you're handing down those tough skin jeans from your sister, cousin, brother, everybody else, and Jacqueline, you're laughing because you know what I'm talking about there. And so we've been doing that for ages, and now we call it something else, but it's really about the messaging and how we get people to buy in and educate. And so when we start to talk about composting, something many people don't do. I mean, if you live in a rural area, you're going to compost, that helps you make good soil. But now that people are really into urban agriculture, into gardening as an outlet and as a food source, and people are really concerned about where their food comes from, that dirt that food is grown in becomes very, very important. And in many of our major cities, we don't have that healthy, good soil. So how do you create that? Composting is a great way, and it's a way to bring what you've eaten and what you purchased at the store back into the system to help get us to zero waste. So that was a very long way to try to answer your question about what we're doing, how we're utilizing the Green Task Force, who I've got members here tonight. We'll give another shout out to them. Are working to put Detroit into a situation where we're now taking the win of taking the Detroit incinerator dark into another win on implementing policy that moves us closer to zero waste. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Councilmember Benson. I mean, I think I've learned so much from all three of you, and we are going to move into our, final closing questions. So Denise, if you could take it away, thanks.
I thought you were going to do it. It's fine. So we had lots of really great information. We actually had 2 sets of questions for each panelist, but you all kind of answered them both. So we really wanted to, we put out the master plan because we want to be very action oriented. And so we want to hear from each of you from your different perspectives. What's the biggest challenge you see to going to zero waste? And what makes you hopeful for a zero waste future? And I'm giving you a time check because we have about 12 minutes till we're closing. So you've got about 2, maybe 3 minutes to answer, which I know is hard to do, but I'm going to challenge you to do that. So Jacqui, would you like to go first?
Not really, but I will. I would say that the biggest, I think the biggest barrier is the political context that makes, that fights against the corporatocracy that benefits from us continuing with the status quo. Yeah, I would say that in terms of biggest barrier, and of course the way to counter that is what Free Your Voice and what so many other communities have done is really the power of the people, which really can overcome. But that's definitely, it's going to require that organizing, that power building, that people, that's going to be critical. But I would say that's going to be the boulder we have to push up the hill. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqui. Shashawnda, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think that exactly what you said, Jacqui. It's the political part. It's let's go talk to them and ask for them to put the money where it's supposed to be at. It's also that this has been the model for too long. People are addicted. It's a bittersweet relationship. And so when breaking that bittersweet relationship, it's creating new models. It's finding different ways to do, to handle the waste, and challenging what they know. But I am hopeful because I know that we are on the right side. I know that it has to be done. I know that people's lives are literally depending on it. And that we have our stories, we have facts. We know that putting, burning trash and polluting the air is not the answer. And so that's why I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful because I see youth doing it every day. I see you still fighting for this, and I get to work with those wonderful youth who are here today. And I want to shout you guys out for all the amazing work that you guys continue to do, fighting for zero waste and fighting for your community's right to breathe clean air, and everyone on this panel for doing the same.
Thank you, Shashawnda. And Councilmember Benson, as an elected official, what do you see as the biggest challenge and what makes you hopeful for a zero waste future?
So the biggest challenge, I'm going to say there as plural. So you're going to have to talk about, number one, a paradigm shift. So moving away from going to the store, buying your plastic bottles, buying all your candy, buying your prepackaged foods, that's going to be a huge paradigm shift. And then telling people, now I want you to go ahead and compost. Now I want you to compost those leaves. The food that you just ate or you didn't eat, go throw those old sweet potatoes in the composting bin and take that outside and make sure you don't get the fruit flies in your house because you waited too long. So we're going to have to do a paradigm shift on what it means to actually go zero waste. We're going to actually have to educate people on how to do that. You're not going to compost the lasagna that someone didn't finish. That's already cooked. So what you need to do is educate people there as well and tell them why. Because it's not convenient, it's extra work, but it's the right thing to do. And I will admit it, we don't always do the right thing. Sometimes because you need to move quickly, you don't put that recyclable package into your recycle bin. Or you know that your recycle bin is full and you don't want to go to the garage to put it into the recycle bin, so you may just throw it away. You got to educate people why it's so important. And then the last part, as a elected official, how do I find the money to do this? Because it's not free. So it costs to have, just to get your trash taken from your curb, there's a cost to that. Then you add on recyclables, there's a cost to that as well. Now you're going to add on your composting, there's a cost to that as well. How do we find the money to do that? And how do we get people to prioritize that going zero waste is what we need to do? And it's going to improve your quality of life, and it's going to help avert the natural disaster that's coming because of a climate catastrophe. So there's a number of areas, a number of things that have to be done, but we can do it. And so then that's the dark side. Oh boy, it's terrible, it's impending doom. No, there's upside to that. There's an opportunity here. How do we take our incremental steps and educate people? How do we get people to see that there's a financial plan to get to where we need to be? And that's where, as an elected official who is pro-sustainability, who is committed to getting Detroit to that blue ribbon designation as the greenest city in the country, is dedicated to getting the education out, dedicated to finding the revenue streams and cracking the code on how to actually support financially getting to a zero waste, and then being willing to advocate and implement policy and cajole, educate, twist arms, beg my colleagues to vote to support policies that will get us there. And so when the city of Detroit, for the first time, implements its greenhouse gas reduction policy, when we stop allowing the purchase of styrofoam products using city money, when we implement our first sustainability office, and these are all wins that the Green Task Force has had over the last 3 years, when I'm able to take Green Task Force members to San Francisco to meet San Francisco environment, when we go to Minneapolis last year to see what they're doing in the Midwest around sustainability, and figure out what we can bring to Detroit and what we're doing in Detroit that other people aren't doing, and export those wins there. So that's how we do it. We've got to be vigilant, we've got to be dedicated, and we have to see the goal and continue to strive and fight for the goal, and not let people say you can't do it, and also not let people think, and love San Francisco and SF environment, they've been doing this for 30 years. It is a long, hard fight, and they continue to fight hard to get there. Just because they're from California and I'm from Los Angeles doesn't mean that you are inherently born with this sustainable mindset. You have to fight for it and be willing to take the slings and arrows to get there, but be willing to fight. And it's the right thing to do. And that's why I am hopeful that we're going to get there.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Benson. It's so great to hear all of that from an elected official. Like, it's oftentimes as community members, we're really pushing forward and hoping that we get our electeds to do the right thing. And so it's great to hear your perspective on that. I think Shashawnda wanted to add a quick thing, and then I'm going to ask Adi the same question as one of our authors for the master plan. So Shashawnda.
Thank you. I think that I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying, Scott, around like having those things. And I agree, like being an elected official and being the front runner of this is very important. And I think that also when you talk about the education, that is so important to community residents. And I think here it's also important to have the infrastructure and support to follow, and having elected officials who's willing to be addicted to zero waste like they are to incineration. Right now, we are giving 10 million in subsidies to incineration, and we're giving only 900,000 to recycling. So that right there shows the commitment. You put your money where your mouth is, and our city is showing that. And it's time to like counter that, to say like, you have to be obsessed. You have to be addicted with zero waste and find the revenue to support it, to support people education, because we don't want to just educate them. We want to give them the support and infrastructure needed where they can follow through and execute all at the same time. That was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shashawnda. So Adi, I'm going to ask you that question. Biggest challenge, what gives you hope? And if you could wrap it up for us, and while you're doing that, if you could put up the slide about our follow-up events, that would be really great.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest challenge, I think for me, the biggest challenge is that there are so many competing priorities, both for communities and city governments right now. We're at a time of crisis, so that feels even more acute, but even before, there was so much competing for the attention and resources, of both our organizers and community members and cities. But back to what everyone was saying earlier, I think it all comes together around waste is not an issue that exists in isolation. Therefore, the solutions to waste are not just solutions to waste. They have to do with climate, they have to do with jobs, they have to do with justice. And what makes me hopeful is that people are, I think, increasingly recognizing the interconnectedness between all of these issues. So realizing that any movements to address climate or jobs or justice, they need to also be thinking about zero waste, and also vice versa, right? A couple of years ago, I was working in climate justice movement spaces and economic justice and immigrant justice movement spaces. I didn't know anything about waste. So now I understand and recognize the inherent interconnectedness between waste and the other things that I care about. So I think what gives me hope is the bridging between movements, because all of our movements are stronger together. And so, I think we're all right now thinking another world is possible. What does that world look like, and what do we need to get there? And what gives me hope is the fact that so many conversations are happening between organizations, between individuals who have different specific areas of expertise, finding common ground together. So that's something that I find incredibly exciting, inspiring, and uplifting. And just to close out, thank you so much to all of the panelists for being here today, and all of the participants for coming out. This really does mean a lot. This is something we've been working on for a long time, that we really hope that it'll serve as a resource to people who are looking to build out zero waste campaigns in their towns, cities, counties. We want this document and this series to be really helpful to you. On Thursday, October 15th at 7 Eastern time, we will have a gathering for people engaged in this organizing and advocacy work. On the afternoon of Thursday, October 22nd, we will be having a session for people who are involved in legislation and policy making, about building a path towards zero waste, just and sustainable cities. So if you could pass the word on to people that you know in your networks, that would be fantastic. That's one immediate next step you can take to help grow this nationwide, worldwide movement for zero waste. Again, that's one immediate next step that it would be amazing if you could take. And then again, the master plan, June, if you could flip ahead to the next side, is on zerowasteworld.org/CWMP. You can check it out there. Let us know what you think. You can also sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on what's happening in zero waste in the United States and Canada and ways to plug into that action. And then to, again, register for these upcoming webinars, which will be tailored to specific audiences geared towards taking action. And this, like these future webinars, will be available on our YouTube channel as well.
Thank you, Adi, and thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone in our audience for joining us today. And we hope to see you at the next two events as well. Everyone have a good evening.